All right, good morning. This is Tom Tresser with the Civic Lab. And this morning we are doing a TIF 101 presentation um, to benefit the Voices of Englewood.
West Englewood.
Williams, our leader and community activist. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to run through the basics of TIFs, take questions, and this session will then be placed online for other people to see. The Voices of West Englewood is our host. Okay, here we go. So we will say that the Civic Lab is a Black-led 501c3 nonprofit do tank for social justice, government accountability, and civic engagement. We do research, education, and training, much like we're doing this morning, to give folks the tools and knowledge they need to be leaders and to take Chicago into the future that we deserve, not the present that we have. And I guess you could say our mojo is investigate, fabricate, educate, liberate, and activate, and then repeat. Or another thing that we live by is you can't be what you can't see. You can't do what you don't know. We are very well known for a book that we published, which is called Chicago is Not Broke, Funding the City We Deserve, which has $5 billion worth of solutions. And we invite you and your colleagues and allies to purchase that at wearenotbroke.org. And you use that in your work. And don't get chumped when the city tells you we have no money. We've been doing this kind of work here with our neighbors, focusing on money, where the money is, how the money goes. Since 2013, we've done over 185 public meetings. This right now would be about meeting 189. So we've been in all over the city, and tens of thousands of people have come out. We have a website called tifreports.com where we have a lot of information, a lot of background, some very helpful videos. So you can just share that URL too, spend some time on that website, and you'll have a lot of good knowledge. Our presentations usually get posted online where they've been watched over 270,000 times. So clearly, this is something people are interested in and should know, deserve to know. We've been invited to present, as I say, over 185 times, but we're actually working in many cities. So people are calling us to help them with the same questions that you have all over the country. Here's just a few of them, including Detroit, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Louisville, everywhere. People are facing the same issues about what the heck is a TIF and why are they trying to ram it down my throat? As you can see, protests all over the country because it's your money. You deserve to know what's happening with it. All right, let's talk TIFs. So what is a TIF? A tax increment financing district. That's what it stands for. And it is created by the municipality, by and large, by the city, the village, under state law. So in Illinois, this law was passed back in, I think, 77. Chicago started its own TIFs under Mayor Washington in 1986. The TIFs, or these special districts, are only inside your city. So the TIFs of Evanston are their own issues. They don't cross into our city. The TIFs of Chicago don't say cross over into Park or anything like that. So it's all contained and controlled inside the city by the mayor. It's controlled. The TIFs come from usually the department of the city government that handles economic development. That's the department that creates and manages the TIFs. So in Chicago, that is the Department of Planning and Development, whose commissioner is Maurice Cox, who serves at the pleasure of the mayor. So this is an executive function. they're designed to subsidize or directly support or send public money into projects in so-called blighted communities. So you have to just pause for a minute and ask yourself about this term blight. And when it shows up in urban planning and politics, especially in Chicago, a little red light should start to go on, because you got to ask yourself, who blighted who? This blight that we're talking about, that we're usually talking about a Black community, honestly, is a function, not the result of what the people in the community did. It's not your fault that you live in a quoted blighted community. You were blighted by government and bank practices over the decades. So this is something that isn't really talked a lot about when we talk about TIFs, but the Civic Lab wants to remind people that Chicago has a history of racism and segregation, and really bad economic practice. And you just can't talk about TIFs without referencing that. But the law says, if you can prove your community is blighted, congratulations, you can get a TIF on. And then whether the TIF is going to help you or not, that's a separate conversation. But the first step in TIF land is proving your community is blighted. And there's a menu of these factors that the state has, and it's like 13 different factors. And if you can prove 5 of the 13, then your community is blighted and may proceed with the TIF process. And we'll talk a little bit about these factors in a minute. That's the first hurdle to get a TIF. The second hurdle is you have to show that the project that you want to create, the for-profit project that you want to create using a TIF, can't happen any other way. In other words, if Tom Trusser wants to build a shopping mall in Englewood, a so-called blighted community, I have to say to the city, I can't get a good loan. The banks won't lend me the money because your community is full of problems. Or if I did get a loan, it would be so expensive, I couldn't possibly do my little project, my mall or my housing project. And that's a whole nother issue that you could spend a whole day discussing, about why a bank won't lend into a poor community, a Black community, community of color. Again, back to this history of segregation and bad policies. The rationale would be something like this. If I wanted to build a little strip mall, say, in a blighted community, and that would have, say, dry cleaners in it, maybe a 7-Eleven store or something like that, or a florist or whatever, a little dress shop, the things that you might imagine to be in a small little strip mall. What the bank is saying is the people in your community have no money, or they're criminals. They'll rob from the store, or they won't be able to, there's no money, or so I can't buy the dress, people, the customers. And so the stores would fail. And the bank saying, I'm not going to lend you money for that kind of a project. But if you insist, Mr. Tom Trusser developer, we will lend you the money, but the rate will be so high, in other words, to cover the bank's risk, that you, the developer, couldn't possibly afford to build it, because otherwise you'd have to then charge $1,000 a square foot for rent, and obviously that whole thing collapses. But if you take the same strip mall, the same idea of maybe 5 or 6 stores with parking, and put it in a white, affluent community, the bank goes, oh, we would love to lend you that money at a very good rate, because I'm sure your project will be quite successful, because the people will come and support those businesses, and everybody will make money. So that's a little the rationale. And that's called the but-for clause. In other words, but for the public money, the TIF, this project could not happen. And that's the one that is often overlooked. But we're going to show you that between these two conditions, proving blight and demonstrating the but-for need, is so.
You said buck for, she say buck, the B-U-C-K, buck for.
But for,
okay.
in other words, but for this, we don't have any public, we can't get to the bank So the only way I can make my project happen is with public money. So it's but for, B-U-T-F-O-R, but for the presence of this free money, I could not do the project. So 2 conditions. I have to prove that the area that I wish to work in is blighted, that meets the statute, and that I couldn't get a regular loan and just do the project myself, you know, like a good capitalist, and just build whatever I want to build and take my chances. And if it's successful, good for me. And I make profit. If I build something and it fails, oh well. Okay. Now, what happens is when a TIF district is created, I will show you in a minute, that that we need to count up the properties, the number of properties in the TIF district. And then what the county does, it tells the city, okay, in this new TIF, there's X number of properties, and here's how much property tax all these properties are producing. So that's what the county does. You know, when they send you your property tax bill, that's part of what they do. They know how much every single property in Cook County is worth, and they know how much property tax each property, commercial or private, is paying. So the city gets a little inventory, a little list that says, inside this TIF district, these 1,000 properties are paying X number of dollars in property taxes. And what the TIF does is it captures or steals every penny of property tax above that, what's called the base. And it does so for 23 years. We're going to go into detail about all this in just a minute. But here's another thing that's very important to remember about all this. And that is, one of the things that needs to be lifted up when we talk about TIFs is this very important point that is often overlooked in all the conversation about economic development. And again, it's important to put a stake in the ground right here and ask yourself, well, what exactly do we mean by economic development? Or what does a quote developed community look like? And I often feel that the community, the folks, are handed a fait accompli. They're told, in order to develop your community, your pitiful, blighted community, you're going to get a thing. And here's the thing that you're going to get, whatever that thing is. And they don't ask the neighbors, I think, a pretty essential question. So take away all the policy words and all the, you know, the planning professionals, and just ask yourself and your neighbors, what do you need to make yourself great? Or put it this way, that sounds a little prejudiced. What is missing in this community, the presence of which would make you greater? Maybe that's a better way to put it. What's missing here, that's something that you need, that would make your life better, that would make your future better, that would make your families better? And just leave it at that, you know, and let the chips fall where they may. I don't think the answer is going to be a Starbucks or a Target. Now, whatever the answers are, if they involve human beings in that solution set, TIFs cannot help you. And here's the reason why. TIFs can only be used to build something, not to hire people. So if you need a health center or a storefront clinic or something like that, it's possible the TIF might build it, but they can't hire the doctors or the nurses to make it operational. If your answer is, you know what, we really need our libraries open to midnight because we have a lot of people working double shifts, and if we find that having a library open, people can go and check out books and then use the computers and get jobs and whatnot, but the libraries close at 7 o'clock. So wouldn't it be great, as part of our, you know, dreaming, is to have the libraries open to midnight? I'm sorry, the TIFs can't help you there either because we can't hire those librarians.
Right.
If you said, we have parks but they all empty. They fired all the park people and there's nothing going on. I would like a lot of sports coaches because we have a lot of young kids in our community and they're all doing up to no good and they're hanging out. Would be great if we had football leagues, basketball leagues, crafts classes, weightlifting classes, whatever, whatever would appeal to your young people. And we want to fill up our parks with the kids. I'm sorry, we can't hire coaches with TIFs. You see what I mean? All right. I hammer that point because it's just a bullet point on the screen right now where it says only for hard costs. But it's easy to overlook how important that is in this whole discussion of what do you need in the community, and then this last point is they last for 23 years. So once a TIF is put on your community by law, it lasts for 23 years. The mayor can move to end TIFs at his or her will, but it takes the vote of the city council. But usually once the TIF is created, it has happened that they are ended prematurely for one reason or another. But that's what the law says. They go for 23 years. And the final point in this little list of basics is also super important. And that is the money that a TIF collects and accumulates is only supposed to be used inside that TIF or very close to it. So the money collected inside a TIF can move to a nearby TIF as long as they touch. And we'll talk about that in a minute. That's a secret inside a secret. It's called porting. But the main point that we will raise later is why that is such a problem and really is at the heart of our argument of why TIFs are racist. And we'll talk about that in some detail at the end of the presentation. But we just wanted to get the basics. So these are the basics. Now, let's explain what this whole increment thing is. I'm going to spend a few minutes on that, and we really want to make sure everyone is comfy with this. All right. So we say the TIF district is created. So this is a real TIF district in the 24th ward in the west part of our community, west part of our city. This is an African-American neighborhood primarily. So you see that the boundaries of the TIF are kind of funky. They're all every which way. And that's one of our mysteries about how these districts are created. Why do they jig and jag every which way? We have a theory that says it has to do with why the TIF was created and how much money it needs. So in a community like this, you're going to have 6 flats and 3 flats and whatnot, and maybe a small apartment building here and there. And they may have to have a lot of properties inside the TIF to accomplish what they want. But in a more affluent or maybe upscale community, there's a 20-story tower full of condos, and each condo is worth $1 million. If they're trying to do something in that community, the TIF doesn't have to be very large to capture a lot of money. So that's just kind of an open question, but let's just take this TIF as an example and say, for the sake of argument, when this TIF was created, that there are 1,000 properties inside the black boundaries, for the sake of our argument. And let's say that they're throwing off $1,000 in property taxes. So again, this is information that the county collects and hands over to the city. The county says, okay, city, you just created this TIF district called the Midwest TIF. We'll tell you that there are 1,000 properties inside this TIF, and that's commercial or private. They're capturing the total number of properties, and they're paying $1,000 in property tax right this minute. Thank you very much. Now, that is called the base. So that's a pretty important term that you need to remember when we talk about TIFs. This base thing, that is that's at the heart of how these bad boys work. So we're saying when the TIF is created, all these properties are throwing off $1,000 in property taxes. That base is the amount of money that's going into the local units of government. So now this is a good chance, a good moment to pause, and we'll ask you, as we would ask other attendees, whether this was live in person or as we are doing this now on Zoom, we would ask our attendees, where does your property tax dollars go? So you can unmute yourself right now and or put it into chat and or both. Where do your property taxes go?
Schools.
Schools. That's a big one. Where else?
Parks,
Parks. You know, so people love their parks. They use their parks. What else?
development in the community.
Yeah, let's call that essential services for the operations of the city of Chicago,
Mhm.
right? And the same for the county of Cook, and so on. The city colleges also get some of your
Mhm.
gifts, your property tax money, obviously, and the public libraries. So if you are a homeowner and you look at your property tax bill and you live inside the city of Chicago, you're going to see those agencies, right? Now, what if you're not an owner and you're a renter? Isn't it the same? You're giving your rent to the property owner and he or she is going to pay the same bill. So we're saying to people, even if you don't own your property, this is still going to affect you. This is still your game. You got skin in this game for sure, even if you're a renter. All right, so what's the number one user of your property tax? Who's the biggest user of your property tax dollar?
I think schools, aren't they?
Yeah.
Or is it TIF?
Oh, well, no, schools by the book. Let's put it that way. What the civics books tell us, and what the elected officials will tell us, will say that yes, Chicago Public Schools get 56 cents, or should get 56 cents of every property tax dollar collected. That's what it says, and that's what it says on your property tax bill. That's when you go to, if you go to the Cook County assessor or some other county official, and they'll show you some kind of chart, you know, where they're reporting to you on how property tax dollars are used. You'll see a pie chart that'll have over half of it, you know, like a little big slice of that pie, and it's for the CPS. And that's true, except when the TIFs come to town. But it's important to remember that. Now,
Can we go back to that question? You say, what is the biggest part where the tip go to? I would say development. That's what I would say, because
that is the ultimate, yes, but that's not on the property tax bill. Yes, that is true after the fact.
most of the time, based on what I have seen in Inglewood and West Inglewood, they utilize the TIF funds to develop. I'm gonna use Whole Food. Okay, that's how Whole Food came into play in the Inglewood area, because they use some of the TIF funds.
Right, that's we're getting to that. But before TIFs come to town, your property tax dollars are not supposed to be used for development. They're supposed to be used to fund the local units of government. That's where we start with. That's an important fundamental. This is how it should be before TIFs came to town. All right, now here's this famous diagram that is often displayed when we talk about TIFs, and it's important to remember what these parts of the diagram refer to. So the blue is the base.
Mhm.
That's the $1,000 we were talking about. Now, we use the word frozen to describe TIFs here because the base is frozen at $1,000.
Okay.
So if the TIFs, if the properties inside this little example TIF are giving $1,000 that goes to units of government over here in year one, right? That's where we are over here.
Yeah.
Here we are in year 23. It's the same amount of money that's going to the units of government by law, $1,000. Now, what's wrong with that? What's the problem with that?
That's double dipping, isn't it?
Yeah, what's happening to everything over 23 years?
Yeah, I mean, everything's going up in value, and I guess the theory goes that the reason that the value of the properties are going up is because of this development that went in that got the TIF money. So and I get very confused, but I guess that this is exactly where this confuses me.
Right. Well, so before we get into the confusion, you just have to understand the reality, and that is $1,000 that is collected and given to the units of government that you just named are the same 23 years later as it is today. And I think your first observation needs repeating. Nothing is going to, no costs are going to stay the same next year, let alone 23 years from now. So the cost of labor, the cost of buying chalk, the cost of a basketball, the cost of a bar of steel to build something, whatever it is you're talking about, it's going to be crazy high 23 years from now. But the same $1,000 is going to the units of government a generation from now as they are today.
So another way of putting that is that, so if we take it as a given that property taxes are supposed to pay for our schools, half of it, and that over 23 years, the cost of running our schools goes up, the amount of money that we have to pay for those increasing costs isn't there. Like, so to the extent we say, oh, there's no money for the schools. Well, no shit, Sherlock. That's because you took all the money away. You froze the money schools are supposed to get.
That is a conclusion that we draw that we will hit pretty hard at the end of the presentation. Yes, so that is the first, I guess you could say, one of the first policy questions that we have for TIFs. Are you not starving the units of government by this operation? And this is just one example. Remember, there's 136 TIFs doing this across a third of the entire city. All right, so this is what we mean by the increment. So here we are, let's say it's year 5. So we're here, and the county again goes through its audit and says, well, you know what? Things were looking up in this TIF district because there are some new properties that came online, and the values of the existing properties have risen a little. So now, instead of $1,000 being collected, we now have $3,000. So that's how much is here. And what is the difference between the amount that's collected in year 5, 3,000, and the $1,000 base? What's the difference?
$2,000.
$2,000. That's the increment that we're talking about. That's what the tax increment district is collecting in year 5, $2,000. So in other words, the properties are throwing off $3,000 of the property taxes, but the units of government only get to keep $1,000 because that's the base, that's the blue. And the TIF district, which is its own little bank account, right? Now it gets $2,000. Now here it is over in year 20. We're way in the future. And again, for the sake of argument, now let's say it's $10,000 collected by the TIF. What's the difference there?
$9,000.
$9,000, right?
So the city is getting $1,000, and the wealthy developers that can only be given the money if they build things are getting $9,000.
The TIF,
So we're just
the TIF is controlled by the city. The developers aren't getting anything unless they apply and are gifted.
Yeah,
but the TIF pot, which is at the mayor's discretion now, has grown by $9,000 in year 20. And this operation happens each and every year for every TIF.
In 136 districts of the city, which is half the city.
So basically what you're seeing is these TIF bank accounts swell up with cash each year from this operation. And now here we have year 23, so that's here. If the TIF now goes away, as it should, then this golden stuff, this right here, all the money collected by the properties go to the units of government, 100%. But it's in year 23.
And does that actually happen? Has that ever happened? Is there any area of the city of Chicago that's sitting on a fat golden goose egg?
Well, yeah, because remember, TIF started in 1986, and so we've had close to 50 TIFs expire or get repealed. So
okay, so they don't just, and so in other words, in practice, they have actually allowed the TIFs to expire, and now that increased revenue actually is now flowing to the community.
As it should have all along.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it just reverts to what it should have been all along. That's
Yeah.
all. But that's what this diagram represents. The light yellow is the intrusion of the TIF. Think of it like Las Vegas. So if you've ever been to Vegas or if you've heard stories of the mob skimming. So in other words, the owner of the casino has 100 slot machines, right? And people are gambling, and the slot machines produced $1 million in revenue, but the mob steals $100,000 of it and reports to the owners, "Hey, we had a great night. You made $900,000 in revenue," but they didn't tell you that they took $100,000 off the top. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like TIFs that happen each and every year.
So
Now-
totally, so this is a setup for them, the city, to gain more money.
Every single year. So
Wow.
what we say in this argument is that the base, that's the money that we know is going to the units of government, is on the books. That is to say, it's open to the public. It's part of the budgeting process, if you follow. Now, our budgeting process in Chicago isn't great, but at least there's a moment when the mayor must release her numbers, and you've got a little bit of time to get them and look at them and decide whether you agree with the mayor's priorities or not. You can call your alderman, you can attend the hearings if you have nothing better to do with your time and don't have a job. You could go to the budget hearings during the day and voice your opinion about the budget. But this TIF stuff is off the books.
Hmm.
It's not part of the budgeting process. It's very hard to find, and it pops up here and there. So it's not like on any set calendar, whereas the budgeting process must happen in order, in public, and has to be finished. You know, the budget has to be approved by the end of the calendar year, but it's usually approved in Chicago around early November, mid-November. And then everyone knows what the deal is for the next year, you know, for the budget of the city of Chicago, good, bad, or indifferent. But TIFs don't follow that pattern. They're secretive, and therefore we say it's off the books.
Yeah, and what's the, because in the report that you sent us to read, it said that the TIF extraction for 2020 was $820 million.
That's right.
And the city budget, the city is getting ready to, they think they're going to have a budget shortfall of what, 125 million? Am I right about that?
Well,
and that's much less than what they thought they were going to have, right?
Well, that's why we published the book, Chicago is Not Broke.
Yeah.
Because this process happens each and every year. We're going to get to some big numbers in a minute, but again, you anticipate a very important public policy question. Is Chicago broke or isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
So
if it's broke, then it's kind of a sad day. You know, we don't really have a lot of ways to go. But if it's not broke, if they're holding on to cash, that's another matter.
Yeah.
Big deal. All right. This is important. So we say TIF money is off the books, or we just use the blunt term, it's a slush fund. Now, to remind you, again, you already talked about this. These are the units of government that get some of our money from the property tax dollar, with, of course, the public schools being at the top of the list at about 56 cents. But you can see the city of Chicago, the county of Cook, the parks, the colleges, and the libraries are all part of this, property tax distribution. So we say there is no such thing as free money. So if you're creating a TIF and you're stockpiling money, there are victims. There are losers in the equation, and we say these are the losers. Now, why haven't they complained? Well, because they're all controlled by the mayor. The mayor appoints the heads of each one of these agencies.
Oh.
Except Cook County. Obviously, the mayor doesn't control Cook County.
And Tony Preckwinkle complains a lot.
At the present time, the Cook County Board President is a Black woman named Tony Preckwinkle, who used to be an alderman from Hyde Park. But she has never used her power to fight TIFs either. So she could, but even if she did, she would be just one vote. And the mayor of the city of Chicago really controls the TIF process. Now, might be a little different if we had an elected school board, because then the school board representative to the TIF process could vote no, but again, they would be outvoted by the mayor's representatives. Okay. As I said, to prove that you can get a TIF, you need to show that you're blighted. These are some of the factors that the state requires you to prove. These are the 5 of the ones that are most cited. Again, there's a consulting firm that makes a lot of money to prove that your community is blighted. And they would have a way to show the city that these bad things are present. And they sound, you know, kind of common sense. You know, if you've got code violations and a lot of vacancies, you know, that could indicate something called blight. But how is it that Chicago's business district down on LaSalle Street is a TIF district? Which it is. It's because when the consultants were doing their job, they noticed cracked sidewalks down on LaSalle Street, and that some of the high-rise office buildings were not 100% occupied. So there was like 30% occupied. Today, they'd be much higher. So they would use those factors to say, yeah, LaSalle Street's blighted. I kid you not. The West Loop, blighted. The South Loop is blighted. And so our conclusion is that basically this is so BS, it's so elastic, that virtually any space or place in the entire state of Illinois can be made can satisfy the law and be declared blighted, which means the whole state is blighted or nobody's blighted. But that's the truth of it. All right, so that's one point that we want to make sure that you understand. Now, how bad are TIFs? What's the story for the city of Chicago? All right, we already mentioned a little bit. In 2020, there was 136 of these bad boys, and another 311 in the rest of Cook County, for a total of 447. So besides the city of Chicago, there's another 90 municipalities. So the stuff that we're explaining here to you today, it's the same for just about every single taxpayer in Cook County. We have common cause with a lot of people across the region.
And does that map show that there is one enormous TIF region covering most of the north side of the city?
It is. That is the Red Line Super TIF.
Oh, Jesus.
That was created a few years ago to fund the expansion and refurbishing of the Red Line. Now, again, for activists on the south side of the city, going all the way down to Pullman, they have been fighting for an extension of the Red Line for 30 years. Now, that's mostly Black, Latino, and working class people that live more on the far south side of the city of Chicago, where the steel mills used to be. But those folk are going to have to wait another maybe 10 years to get their Red Line, whereas we up here on the north side, we've had all our Red Line stations refurbished, and there's even a flyover over at Belmont for $500 million that's designed to sort of reduce waiting time by 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Tracks cross, so under Emmanuel, and first under Daly, under Emmanuel, there's a huge flyover that takes the Brown Line over the Red Line. A completely useless thing that they caused many properties to be demolished. But the point is, the people on the south side are still waiting, and will have to wait for their Red Line extension, which should have been done decades ago. All right, but again, that is a very important question to note. So where the TIFs are created is where money can happen. All right. And as I said before, about 30% of the entire city is in a TIF.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Civic Lab, we like horror movies. I'm a fan of the old monster movies. I don't know if you know the Frankenstein movies, but you know, the deal was the scientist gets the old dead body parts and stitches them all together, fires them up with electricity and says, "Don't worry, I got it under control. The creature will do my bidding," right? And then what happens? The monster bursts his chains. He breaks the scientist's neck. He runs out and he sets the village on fire. That's kind of how we take a look at the TIFs. TIFs have run amok. 136 active TIFs in the city of Chicago in 2020. They took $820 million off the table. So that operation that we showed you, with the increment, looking at the increment every year, the total number of that for 2020 was $820 million. So that's $820 million that did not go to the list of units of government, right? Schools, libraries, city, county. Instead, went into these little bank accounts to be used at the mayor and her allies' discretion.
And what is the city? Oh, wait. Oh, so that's the city budget? $450 million is the city's budget?
That's how much TIF spent.
Oh, out of TIFs.
Out of TIFs. No, the city's budget is total $20 billion if you add up all the units of government. I'm just saying, what did the TIF spend in 2020? Again, this is not budgeted. This was not the $450 million that they spent in 2020 was not available for you to look at back in 2019 when the mayor was saying, here's how we're going to proceed in the year 2020. Here are my priorities for the city's budget. This $450 million was nowhere to be seen.
So there's $450 million spent in 2020. This is the idea that they came up with the South and West Side development.
These were spent across all the TIFs.
Okay.
All 136 TIFs. And since TIFs came to Chicago in 1986, a total of $10 billion has been taken or stolen or removed. That's a lot of money, to kind of go missing, don't you think? And the TIF Illumination Project at the Civic Lab has been trying to find that money and explain, and as best we can, who got it. I think it's a good question that should be answered. Where's all that money? Now, part of our analysis is that under Mayor Daley, when he first came into office, someone in his shop realized the power of this program. And so you can see the number of TIFs increasing every single year under Mayor Daley, right up until the time he left office, when they started to go down a little because underperforming TIFs that weren't doing much, were extinguished. But the amount of money that the TIFs have taken, as shown by the red and orange lines, have gone up and up and up. So the number of TIFs may not be as great as they used to be, but the amount of money they're taking is off the charts. So we say Mayor Daley is the king of TIFs. And our analysis is that the real estate industry that got all this money from TIFs turned around and gave him and his allies campaign contributions in the millions of dollars. And that's how the machine kept its power over the last 25 years. And that is the same for Rahm Emanuel, and it's the same for Lori Lightfoot. The secret sauce to the Chicago machine is the campaign contributions they get from the real estate industry and their allies in big law and big banking. And we're happy to dispute that in public with anybody at any time. And nobody.
Yeah, I think that's the real harm. Is this is an engine for that level of corruption? Because I think by my math, the $820 million that TIFs took in 2020 represents about 4% of the total budget.
Yeah.
So even though like $820 million, that's a lot of money, it is also only 4% of the total budget. And so, when you talk about, where's the city budget going and how come the West Englewood is still, blighted when, downtown, those are other questions. And I think that, if we eliminated all TIFs, it's not like, and let's say we even just gave all, whatever, the amount of money is not the greatest harm. I think, in my opinion, from what you're describing, the greatest harm is that this is a little slush fund and it creates this level of corruption.
Yes.
It is the real harm.
Well, I would agree. We would agree, and we're going to cover that at the end of the presentation. And you can debate which is the greatest harm, but I mean that is a harm, absolutely. Now, the biggest single service that the Civic Lab renders to the people of Chicago every year by doing this kind of work is to reveal the amount of money captured and left in the TIF accounts at the end of the year. So we've shown you that in 2020, there was 136 TIF districts, right? They each have a bank account. They each had that little operation of counting up the number of properties, how much money over the base. That money is what is kept in the TIF, right? So you get that. So that operation was performed 136 times in 2020. All that money went into the TIF accounts, but there was already money there. So if you think of your own personal bank account, right? You start the year out with money. You have money coming in, you have expenses going out, and at the end of the year, you have a balance. Hopefully it's more than you had at the beginning of the year. So the same thing with all the TIFs. So the question on the table that the Civic Lab answers every year is how much money are we talking about at the end of 2020? Do you guys know the answer?
No, I don't.
No, of course you don't.
Well,
Well,
wouldn't it be about $400 million if it said that they took because I guess there's leftovers from every previous year too. So the
That's right.
total is probably getting, so that's actually compounding. So that it's probably a lot of money.
a lot of money. Here's the answer. Don't worry about it.
$1.9 billion unspent TIF funds.
So
Wow.
at the end of 2020, what the Civic Lab is saying is if you go to 136 bank accounts and just add up the money that's sitting in there, at the end of the year, it was almost $2 billion. And remember, these are property tax dollars. This is not federal, excuse me, federal grants or other kinds of strange sources of funds that have a lot of, restrictions on them. It's plain old property tax dollars from you and me, the people in the TIF districts. So that is why we just simply do not believe the narrative that we are given by the city and other civic leaders like foundations and think tanks and people who have like staff, and economists and really smart people. I mean, remember, the Civic Lab doesn't even have an office. We have no paid staff. I'm not being paid to deliver this presentation to you. So if we can find this information, where's all the other big brains in the city who have offices and PhD people working for them and whatnot? You mean to tell me they don't know this? Bullshit. So we found this out years ago, and we just repeat this operation every single year. We're doing it now, and in a little while, we'll be able to sort of revisit you and tell you what happened in 2021. Is this going to be the same? This is just, add a few more dollars to it. It'll be a year later, but the numbers will be very similar, I guarantee you.
And the interest that's being earned on that $1.9 billion, does it go back into the same?
Yeah, so the money is being held in bank accounts. But again, that's a very interesting question. What is the interest rate? Is it a good one or is it a sweetheart deal? I mean, the evidence would tell you that Chicago has a sweetheart deal with all kinds of banks, and I doubt very much that money is working hard for us. But again, add that to a long list of very good questions. What is the deal? But
Yeah,
we're going to show you that there's TIFs hold debt as well. And so again, it's a related question. How much debt is being carried by TIFs?
And it's even which banks are given those deposits to hold, and are they in compliance with the City of Chicago reparations law? For example, the J.P. Morgan Chase, the only little law that we've got says you have to report whether you ever benefited from slavery. J.P. Morgan Chase did, but they refused to say so on the paperwork. Yet we keep giving them deposits. We
Well-
should take all city money away from J.P. Morgan Chase, including this. And what would happen if we took this $1.9 billion and just gave it to black-owned banks or black-owned community savings and loans or whatever? That alone would,
That's
and giving them.
Another great question. And you'd probably be upset to learn that over the years, the TIF program has given Wells Fargo tens of millions of dollars of interest payments. Now, Wells Fargo is not doing business with the TIFs anymore because they're a criminal enterprise.
Yeah,
But
they
for
are.
years and years, Wells Fargo held hundreds of millions of dollars in debt from the TIF program. And it's a good question to ask. Well, how do they get in debt in the first place? And the other questions you just answered, like, are these good banks that we should even be doing business with in the first place, let alone giving them all this sweet money? All right, but I want to hit this point again that almost $2 billion in property taxes were sitting in bank accounts somewhere, at the end of 2020. And if you remember nothing from this presentation, you must remember that. We're talking a lot of public money sitting somewhere doing we don't know what, but it's certainly not serving the people, that's for sure. All right, how bad is it for the state of Illinois? Well, in 2019, there were 580 municipalities across the state with almost 1,400 TIF districts. So we're not alone. This is not just a scam here. It's bad in Chicago, but it's not unique to Chicago. It's across the entire state. And you can see the amount of money on this chart is astronomical for the state of Illinois. As we say, 580 municipalities, almost 1,400 TIFs, $2 billion total stolen across the state. So we said it's about 800 million, whatever it was in 2020. 820 for Chicago. So you can see that Chicago accounts for about 2/3 of the entire TIF take for the state of Illinois, which makes sense. Chicago is a big city. It's wealthy. Obviously, it plays a very big role in the state's economy. And this number kind of shows you that. And
So that $1.9 billion is statewide?
Statewide.
Okay.
And so Chicago had 820 of that. And since TIFs came to Illinois, we're talking about $25 billion. So again, this is a statewide issue, and the same questions that are kind of starting to percolate in your head about Chicago can be said about the entire state. Is Illinois broke? Did Illinois have to attack its teachers and retired public workers to take away their pension benefits and claiming that we're poor? Illinois can't pay its So you're a state worker, a teacher or a nurse, a road worker or what have you, and you were working for the state of Illinois with your union and you had a contract. You didn't get benefits because you got a big pension. And now over the last 10 years, those same retired workers have been ripped off. And politicians are claiming that they're greedy and you have to suffer because, we're all in a tough boat. So I know you were promised benefits in your retirement package, but we can't deliver them because Illinois is broke. And we've heard that over and over again. And again, the Civic Lab raises the question, well, what if that $25 billion was left in all the treasuries of all the cities across the state, across all that time?
So Tom, this is so amazing and it's very informative what you're saying about these TIF funds. My question is, all of the city council that's down there with the mayor, they are not fully aware of how these funds are going? What kickback are they getting for not speaking up about the TIF funds in the area?
Well, you'd have to ask them. They don't talk to me. I can tell you that of the 187 meetings we've done, none of them have been called by a sitting alderman. a few aldermen have come into the audiences and sat in the back. But I would say there's a reason why the aldermen are sitting with this and don't push back on it. Some of them simply don't know, and that's, you know, that's just their ignorance or their willfulness, because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to ask these questions. But that's a good question. I mean, you've put that on the list of your questions, you know. Ask your sitting alderman, what do they know about TIFs, and why do they think they're good, you know? All right. So this is the story for Illinois. So then the question is, well, how bad is it across the whole country? So, you know, how many TIFs are we talking about? Well, sadly, we really don't know, but Civic Lab estimates that 40,000 TIFs steal $40 billion a year. So we just showed you they took over $1 billion just in Illinois in 1 year. And we're just, from what we know about the TIFs across the states, we think the grand total in America every year is $40 billion. And again, American public schools, the #1 victim, right? Because in other places in America, the schools get 60 cents of the dollar, not 50, or sometimes even 65 cents, but not when the TIFs are present. So we think this is an issue for the PTAs of America, for the teachers unions of America, for, you know, the parents of America. Your kids are getting robbed. It's as simple as that. And that's our
But that explains to me why the teachers union was, and the mayor was at it so tough, because of the funds is not getting filtered into the school system.
Well, the teachers union knows this. They have a huge resource department. They have researchers who presumably know what I know. If I know this, the researchers and the economists who work for the teachers union know this, but the teachers union does not call for the abolition of TIFs. And that's another good question that I would love answered. If anybody knows Stacey Gates, the new president of the CTU, why don't you ask her what her position on TIFs are? I would love to know. All right.
I'm gonna do that. I know somebody that knows her, so I'm gonna
I would love
have a
to hear
sit-down
her response.
conversation with her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love to know the answer to that for sure. All right, now in conclusion, what we want to show you are, you've already anticipated some of these issues. By your questions, you've already kind of lifted up what we call the policy problems or the insults that TIFs represent, right? And you've already sort of poked your stick in that direction, but now we want to cover them with some precision, and we'll cover some ground that we've already raised, but I think it's important to really nail these down. So each of these issues that we're going to share with you now are things that you can organize around. They're questions that you should be asking to be settled to your satisfaction. All right, the first one was, we already raised this question, TIFs starve local government. So if you care about your property tax bills, which means how is the city functioning? Does it have enough money to do what it needs to do? You should be up in arms around TIFs. And again, I'll just repeat that chart, you know. Why aren't the public schools up in arms around this? Well, because Mayor Lightfoot appoints the school board. So if you know anybody on the school board, ask them this question. They need to explain themselves. And especially if we're going to have an elected school board, well, I don't know if we're going to have one, but this would be an issue to run on if you were to run as a school board member, is you're going to get to the bottom of this and you're going to sort it out. And Chicago's schools are not going to be treated in this way. But I would be very interested in hearing what the school board today, as it constitutes, even though they were appointed by Mayor Lightfoot, what do they answer about this? Are they okay with this? Okay. Next thing, the definition of blight is meaningless. I think I was pretty clear about that. TIFs have spent $842 million on properties in the Loop. We're talking about high-rise buildings, office buildings owned by white billionaires. Mariano's grocery store, the developer received $7 million for building the Mariano's in Greektown
Mhm,
on Halsted and Monroe. I
mhm.
invite you and your allies to go there to Mariano's and just walk around and tell me if you think that area is blighted.
It's not.
I don't think so. But the developers of Mariano's gave the alderman $6,000. It's a tiny bit of money, really. It's chunky.
Well, and I think this is part of the problem, this whole 23-year thing, because today that certain area is not blighted, but I was selling real estate in that area in 2000, 2001, and it was a very, very different area back then. And certainly, and even 10 years before that, it was even more different. So a question that comes to mind is, when was that TIF in that area established?
This TIF goes from 2011.
It was started in 2011. Well, that's interesting too, because there was, a huge amount of development in the West Loop in those, the first 5 years of the new millennium, and then the 2008 crash hit, and the vacancies in the West Loop were excessive. There is no doubt about that. So if the standard is excessive vacancies, yes, it was true, but that's where the problem here is that it's 23 years, because this is excessive vacancies, but this is also in a neighborhood, like, we just built all of this brand new housing for rich white people. Obviously, this is a temporary situation. If you want to do a TIF, fine, but make it be a 5-year TIF, 10-year TIF.
I understand that, but in this particular case, there was a grocery store, a Dominick's, built across the street, and it didn't receive any TIF money. So, so how is it that one developer, builds a grocery store and just does it the old-fashioned way, but this guy,
Yeah.
$50 million. Now, the developer, and his name is Cy Taxman, you can believe that.
See.
He built this building that has, you can see the Mariano's, but there are other stores on the first floor. The whole project, he put in about $5 million of his own money. He got maybe a $20 million construction loan or something like that, and then $7 million of public money. Within 2 years, he flipped it to Jones Lang LaSalle, one of the biggest property developers in the world, and probably made about 40% profit based on what we've researched in other deals. But he took the $7 million with him. He didn't give us back the $7 million, or he didn't give us back the $7 million with interest. So we acted as Cy Taxman's private banker. And this is very common when these deals happen. The properties are developed, they get flipped. The developer walks away with his profit, plus including our money.
Mhm.
That's part of the game. All right.
And we're still
Over in my community, you can see Grossinger's Auto is a large building where the blue arrow is, was converted from a warehouse into the Grossinger Auto Superstore with their repair headquarters and so forth. Now, Grossinger has since sold that building to Leader Automotive from Canada. But back in the early 2000s, they got $8.5 million to renovate that building. But there's an Apple store, there's Steppenwolf, there's a Charles Schwab securities office across the street. So this is my area. Like, literally, I can walk to that spot in 5 minutes. It's the hottest retail area in the city, I would say. And even though this was 10 years ago, it was still hot. It was hot. It is hot. Yeah, it cools down because of the things that Julia mentioned. There's a lot of vacancies, no doubt, as the economy, because now COVID is on us. But you still are faced with the inescapable conclusion that the word blight is meaningless, and it actually is a loaded term.
I can imagine the defenders of this might argue that the reason that Clybourne corridor is so hot today is because of the TIF money, and if it weren't for this TIF money, because that Clybourne corridor, when I was a young 20-something taking the Red Line to work in downtown Chicago, I would ride past there, and
that is true. That is an argument they use, but it's ridiculous. I mean, this is one TIF that benefits one business. The TIF was drawn to match the boundaries of one building.
Oh,
The
really?
area is booming, has been booming, will be booming.
When was this
Give or
district?
take the ups and downs of the economy, but you do anticipate a very well articulated defensive TIFs, and what we say is you're confusing coincidence with causality. That we would say that the trend in urban America over 30 years is that the values are going up and up and up, and partly it's because parents who moved out of the city to raise children in the suburbs are moving back. It's partly because of the tech boom where young professionals want to live in urban centers. There's a lot of things going on in America that make cities valuable, livable, and these factors have been true for a long time. So the economists and the people who study this would say who have looked at this in detail would say, when you compare cities that have TIFs that are similar to cities with TIFs, it's a wash. And they find that the presence of TIFs actually are a depressant.
It's interesting.
But truthfully, we can't really know because we can't go back in time, Julia, and say, let's look at the Loop, or let's look at Brooklyn or Kansas City or whatever city you want to think of that has TIFs, and go, let's imagine it without the TIFs. You
can't prove the counterfactual.
You can't go back to 1980 and let's just look at Kansas City now without TIFs. But the economists, as best as they can with the data at their disposal, tell me that the real truth of the matter is the TIFs have nothing to do with economic development. Now that is a startling explanatory thing, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. All right, let's continue on with these. I want to make sure we cover them all. Here's the point I made earlier. TIFs cause economic inequity and they bolster segregation. Because I told you that the TIF money has to stay where it is, they hoard property taxes, people. They hoard them where there's prosperity. Think about it. If a TIF gathers property taxes, and if you use TIF money for economic development, and your community is poor to begin with, are you going to have a lot of extra property taxes?
Mm-hmm.
No, because you're poor. But if my community, which is doing very well, thank you, has a TIF, it's going to fill up with money, as I told you. But that money collected in the prosperous part of Chicago cannot find its way to you by law because it has to stay where it's collected. That is racist. That is anti-progressive. It's anti-distributional. A progressive economics says the rich pay more than the poor. They don't get taxed at the same rates. So my income tax under the federal income tax is I'm going to pay a higher rate than someone who would be my cleaning lady, or if I owned the factory, right? And my factory workers make less than my federal income tax is going to tax me at a higher rate. That's called progressivity. And it's one of the sad features of the state of Illinois that our income tax for the state is not progressive, right? So that means that in Illinois, we're relying overly on property taxes to run our government. I've already shown you that. But what if our community is poor and doesn't throw off a lot of property taxes? It's the same for any part of the state of Illinois. You're going to see a huge difference from places that have a lot of money to places that don't have a lot of money. So in the state of Illinois, if your town is wealthy, your schools look great, right? Because they're collecting a bunch of money to fund their schools. But you go 5 miles away to a Black or brown community, or a community of modest means, their homes aren't that great. There is no big factory necessarily or mall. Their property taxes are lower. Their schools look shitty.
Mm-hmm.
This is the reason why. And it's a state issue that affects us down here in the state of in Chicago when we have these TIFs on top of everything else. So we really want to hammer this. in the city of Chicago that already has this history of racism and segregation and division of wealth, TIFs are part of that legacy, and they continue to enforce it. So the property taxes that are being hoarded in the TIFs, in the loop, in the hundreds of millions of dollars each and every year, cannot be used to improve conditions in other parts of the city. So that's why we call it racist. There's simply no way around it. Now, TIF defenders will offer, yeah, but we can take some money here and move it here. It doesn't address the central issue that we laid before you. And just to show you the evidence, these are examples. We have many, many more, literally dozens more, of projects funded in the Loop or the Central Business District over the years. $54 million to convert this office building into condos. $5 million to convert an office building into the Hard Rock Hotel. $11 million to help build PepsiCo's West Loop headquarters. Last time I checked, PepsiCo wasn't in the poorhouse. But yet they qualified under the statute that we've explained to you and got this money legally. Now, the biggest issue that I have with TIFs right now are these two super TIFs. And you should hammer your elected officials and anybody who defends TIFs with these two bad boys that just came online literally in the last days of Rahm Emanuel's administration. It was rushed through. There were literally thousands of people protesting. It didn't matter. The Lincoln Yards TIF, which is actually called the Cortland Armitage's TIF, I think, but I call it the Lincoln Yards TIF, was passed to subsidize this mammoth project up in my community along the river, right? $1.3 billion. The other big project that was approved at the same time was the Project 78, which is down by Roosevelt Road and the river. 1.1 billion. Now, hidden inside those fees is $800 million to Wall Street just for debt. Because we don't have that money on hand. So when we promise the developers that we're going to subsidize them with this TIF money, we got to go to the bank. This is what I was saying earlier. We got to take a loan to start this TIF process rolling. We don't have $1.3 billion lying around.
So wait a minute. So when the Lincoln Yards, $1.3 billion, is that basically saying that that's how much Lincoln Yards will get over the 23-year period?
Oh, that's how much money we're promising Lincoln Yards to do the project.
No, and why?
We're gonna build some bridges. We're gonna lay roads. We're gonna put a metro station in there. That's money we're spending to make their project happen.
Right. So, but how did that $1.3 billion get calculated?
Well, they added up they added up their costs. This is from the developer. This is from Sterling Bay. Sterling Bay said, in order for us to do our project, which is about $3 billion, we're going to need some help. We need two new bridges built. We need the roads widened. We need this stuff remediated because there's a lot of crap here. We need help paying for that. And we want to put a new metro station in there. They added all that up, and it was 1.3 billion. And the city said, we will give it to you.
And where are we? And so where are we? I mean, yeah, where are we getting the $1.3 billion?
We have to take a loan for it.
But right. So but how and where? I don't know how to ask. So in what way is that a TIF? I'm asking a dense question, but I'm.
Well, the TIF is created that is the footprint of the Lincoln Yards project. So all the improvements that are happening inside that project boundaries, the extra bridges, the widening of roads, new roads. There are no roads in some there because it was just a steel mill. So if we're going to build new roads, lay sewers, lay electric lines, all that they calculate to be 1.3 billion.
So I guess
Sterling
Julie,
Bay,
so
the
Julie is,
developer will pay for those, will pay that as they do the project, they pay for the roads or whatever is they're building, and then we pay them back.
through our taxes,
We're gonna pay them back.
through our taxes.
The idea is,
No, Tom, I'm asking the question. Through
Go
our
ahead.
taxes is how they gonna get this fund. Even though we taking out a loan, we the one that's paying for it, right?
yeah, Sterling, in this particular deal, Sterling Bay, the developer, will hire the contractors with city approval to, I mean, they're gonna do a process to like, how is the bridge gonna be designed over the river, whatever. But at the end of the day, Sterling Bay will pay the actual bill, and then we pay them back for
Through
their
the taxes.
expenses.
Through the taxes from us?
From,
'Cause
well,
I'm
we've already taken
confused.
we're taking the
No,
loan.
no,
out.
we took the loan out, but through the taxes, even though we paying for it.
We're
So
paying
this,
for it.
we paying for through, so they can get this $1.3 billion.
Yeah.
Free
And
money.
the
That's free money
the
from them.
idea is that over the 23 years of the TIF, all the increment that's being collected by that TIF is supposed to pay the loan back.
Okay. And
So
so they
that's-
created the
So they're
TIF in
saying
like
we're
what,
gonna- what?
2018? They created the TIF in like 2018 or something like
At the
that?
end of 2019.
The end of 2019. And basically, and so this is where I'm trying to get at. So it sounds to me as though what you're saying is the developer said, we need $1.3 billion. And we said, well, let's create a TIF. And they built the TIF based upon where they think they need to get the $1.3 billion from. And they would have made it bigger if they would have needed $1.7 billion.
Right.
And they would have made it smaller if they needed only 800 million.
Yeah, and the thing here is, I'm not against building a bridge over the river if we need one. But it begs the question of where should the city be building stuff?
Yeah.
And who should drive that process? Do we really need a new bridge over the river? Well, we may, but if we do, it should be part of a larger capital project that includes where the city is broken right now. So if you look around the city, where do we need, for example, lead pipelines, lead water lines replaced? Is there another part of the city that's falling apart that needs infrastructure? And that includes new schools, new parks, right? So if the city is going to respond to a developer and say, oh yes, you get to the head of the line, we're gonna, we'll build you a bridge so you can do your city within a city. You're basically saying to the rest of the city, take a ticket, stand in line, whatever your needs are, we're not even looking at your needs. If you need new sewers, new water mains, new parks, new whatever, a new L stop, whatever you need that a capital campaign would fix, we're not addressing you. So this,
But if the TIF hadn't been created, if it hadn't been, and there was, $1,000 in tax money being collected in that same geographical area for the next 20 years, wouldn't that $1,000 of tax money be spent on the schools and libraries in that geographical area?
no, the money that they said to the city is spent as part of the city budget. The $1,000 from that example, isn't just used locally. The TIF money is used locally. The base is distributed to all units of government to run their operations. Now, what we're saying is, if Sterling Bay wanted to build this mega city, which by the way we think is ludicrous, right, and loaded with high-end stores, I think they're talking about 20,000 units of housing. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know. It's ridiculous. But the point
None
is,
of which is going to be affordable, and it's all in one of the.
Of course not. But the point is, if you want to build something that's crazy, go ahead and build it and roll the dice. If you need a bridge to make your project happen, friggin' build a bridge. That's on you.
Yeah.
And in many places in America, when developers build these things that require a new road or whatever, they got to do it. No one's telling you to do it. I'm not forcing you to do it. Right? You want to do it, go
back
do
in
it.
back in the 19th century, the railroads that got built the railroaders paid for those tracks to be built. They didn't expect government to build the railroad tracks for them. They're like, hey, we're going to make a metric crap ton of money by owning a railroad. And I guess in order for us to make that money, we'd better build some infrastructure first. And so it was a great benefit. Like, an industry made a whole lot of money, but the public benefited because now we get to use the things that they built. Now it's the other way around. Now they say, capitalism says we're going to make a metric crap ton of money off of this stuff that we're going to build, and we're so poor we can't afford to build the infrastructure. We need government to subsidize, to pay for our infrastructure so that we can make a bunch of money. It's the most bass-backwards bullshit, bastardization of capitalism I've ever heard.
Well, so you now raise another very fascinating point that is often overlooked, but it should be part of the mix. And I'll rephrase what you just said. Having TIFs present queers the deal, and people build things that they shouldn't build because they're not taking the full risk. So what you see across the country are shopping malls and other projects like Targets and Walmarts that were built with subsidy. They really shouldn't have built it because the market couldn't take it. So, in Kansas City, there was already 2 Walmarts. They built a third one. The market wasn't really there. And so the third one failed, right? So then what you have is a donut situation where there's a failed project, whether it's a Walmart or a Target or something that cratered, and it takes the properties around it down. So if I'm a developer and I have to do very careful math to like, this is a big risk for me to build 10,000 units of housing, high-end housing, and 40 high-end retail stores. That's a big risk. I better make sure I have everything dotted and that my risk is minimal so that if I pull this off, I'm a hero. I'm going to make, as you say, a ton of money. But if you're going to give me 20 to 30% of my nut, now I feel like, I can really roll the dice because I'm not using all my money. I'm using your money. But you know what? If this thing goes bust and say Lincoln Yards fails, they sell to somebody else, they're going to take our money. So if we've already spent the money for the bridge, that's sunk. And if the project goes south and nothing really happens there for 15 years, they just miscalculated terribly. They didn't know COVID was coming. I'm sorry for them. They didn't know. And now instead of the massive thing they want to build, it's much more modest. And we can't pay the bills back. What if we can't pay the loan? The loan is the loan. The bank isn't going to let us walk. So the public, the city of Chicago, is on the hook for whatever loan it is. And as I say, it's $800 million in finance fees that is going to be made by somebody.
Yeah, and Sterling Yards says, or Sterling Bay, whatever their dumb name is, says, they should be the ones paying to build the bridges and the roads. They should be the ones investing in that stuff. And all these, and the argument against undoing any of this stuff is, if Illinois and Chicago won't do it, we'll just go to some other city. And what's interesting is now with this ridiculous regressive national push with abortion and other things, there's a good chance that actually there's only about 12 states in the country that sane companies want to come to anymore anyway. So this whole argument that we have to, prostitute ourselves to get you to come to us, that's not going to be so true anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see how this,
that's very true in this gamble of site selection.
It's interesting also that it's going at the exact same time. We might have a 30 to 50% turnover in city council in the 2023 election because of all the people stepping down and trying to run for mayor and all the other things. And I've heard a couple of very progressive alderpersons say this could be exciting. We could do some actual change in the city of Chicago because of who's coming in, and then this, and we could actually change this whole TIF situation. And
anyway. I would ask. Again, we would go to any public forum and argue that TIFs should be abolished. They can't be reformed. So hopefully we're loading you up with enough reasons. Okay, so these 2 TIFs, as I say, are on the books. And whether Lincoln Yards happens the way it was imagined and whether Project 78 happens the way it was imagined, you can see the illustrations. There are literally cities within cities. we're on the hook. Now, a new city council could void them. They can just say, we don't think this was done with the right process. We think they were corrupt, and we cancel it and sue us, Sterling Bay, sue us, Structured Development. We're happy to see you in court because the prior process was corrupt. Now, how corrupt was it? Well, pretty corrupt. So these are aldermen who oversaw the distribution of TIF funds. And in their cases, they all received campaign contributions. So Alderman Carrie Austin, who's under indictment right now for TIF-related land-based fraud, received almost $15,000 from the developers of 2 projects that received about $23 million in TIF funds. That's a great rate of return. So Walter Burnett, as I mentioned, received $3,000 just from that one project, the Mariana's Grocery project. Danny Solis, who's probably going to go to prison, we're not sure. He wore a wire for the FBI for 2 years. He was the head of the zoning committee. The zoning committee is one of the 2 committees that have to bless and approve all TIFs. So he received $64,000 from just the people involved in one project that received $9 million in TIF funds. Danny Solis, dirty, corrupt, and oversaw a dirty and corrupt TIF process. Brian Hopkins, the sitting alderman of the 2nd Ward, received $6,000 from the tax lawyers from Lincoln Yards. But all these aldermen are going to tell you, that has nothing to do with anything. You know,
And Brian, supposedly, he's getting ready to run for mayor. I saw one of his closest allies last night for dinner, and she said that he's going to jump into the mayoral race.
Right.
We'll see.
Who
Brian
We
Brian
characterize Brian Hopkins as simply the alderman for the developer community. He's really representing developers. That's really what his job is, really to carry the water for the real estate industry in the city council, which he's done very well. And he's made over $2 million in campaign contributions from the real estate interests.
Yep.
Now, my favorite example of TIF corruption is this guy, Ed Burke, the chairman of the finance committee up until recently, the longest serving alderman in history. He himself is under indictment and is likely to go to prison. He was in charge of the finance committee, which is the super committee that approves all TIF. The zoning committee must bless the TIF, but the TIF cannot actually happen legally without the first approval of the finance committee. And when the FBI released the wiretaps on the guy that he was shaking down, the businessman said, I need his favor, Ed Burke's favor, for my TIF money. Ed Burke's favor to get my TIF money. So we just basically say this is a totally corrupt process. It has been in Chicago for decades. And every TIF dollar that's been distributed up until the time, this present day, has been under this corrupt process, which has been run for decades by Ed Burke and Danny Solis, 2 guys who should be
going to prison.
All right. So let's keep the video rolling while you ask any questions or reactions to the information that we've given you.
Wow, I'm still absorbing all of this, what you just displayed to me and Julia on this TIF. It's a lot to kind of absorb in. I probably have to go over it multiple times. I do have an understanding, but I need a full understanding how I can get it digested in my system. So when I'm out and the TIF come up, I'm able to articulate it correctly in the form where people can grasp why it's important to know this process about the TIF in our community. I'm in West Inglewood. TIF never comes in my area. It always starts at 59th and back. It never hit from Garfield to 58th Street. So my area is private because we have so many vacant lots and abandoned buildings in my area. So this is the reason why I'm running for the automatic position, alderperson in the 15th Ward. So I can bring this information to the people in my area so they can understand why it's important to know what's going on in your district. So I thank you, Tom, for taking the time, doing this one-on-one training with me and Julie. Julia, so we can actually dissect it a little bit more and educate the people in the neighborhood, not only just in West Inglewood, over there in Julia area too as well, because this is good information for people to know about.
And, Gloria, what you just said, you said there's no TIF money ever comes to my area. And that reveals, before, Tom came to us and provided us with this education, not just today, but previously, the word on the street is we want to get ourselves some TIF money. Like to the poor communities that just get scraps and pennies. This feels like a lot of money. I'm like, oh gosh, what can we do to get ourselves some of this money? And it's difficult. It's painful for people who are already getting so little to become warriors in the fight, to say this whole system, like we need to, as tempting and as tantalizing as it might seem, if we were able to access $1 million of this TIF money, because we don't, $1 million sounds like a lot to us. So, it's tantalizing to say, the thing that we want to do is we want to figure out how to get some of that TIF money, when in reality, the much better thing to do would be to say, screw that. We don't want that $1 million, because by taking that $1 million, all we are doing is becoming a cog in the wheel of a racist, corrupt system that is stealing money from us. And if we got rid of this TIF system altogether, that would allow us to implement a different system whereby we could get $50 million in our community if we demanded it. And instead, we're settling for this $1 million and supporting a corrupt system that is, doing all the things that that Tom has spent the last hour and a half explaining to us. And that's the challenge. And that's where,
it's very tempting. As I sit, and Tom, you came in the Inglewood area multiple times in these sessions on the TIF funds, which some people got it and some people didn't get it. They thought it was a great idea to have it in the community, but it really wasn't. It kind of put a hinder to us getting what we really need in our neighborhood. So back to my question. If city council, all the aldermen that make up the city council, they should know and understand this process, but instead they're not even speaking up to make a change in their ward.
All right, so
that's how I see it, and what I'm looking and listening to.
Thank you for those comments. We're going to conclude this video with just a reflection on what Gloria just said. Why don't the aldermen debate this openly? The Civic Lab is ready to present this information in any forum, in any place or space, to the Civic Federation, to the Metropolitan Planning Council, on the floor of City Council itself. You name the space and the place, and we'll bring all the numbers and arguments, and we were happy to engage with the mayor herself or her budget director or anybody else to let's duke it out to answer those questions that you guys have asked, which deserve to be answered. So that concludes our presentation of the Civic Lab here today, TIF 101, Fighting for Economic Justice.